Welcome to the February 1st edition of the PFF Forecast. It is Wednesday evening. It is the off week. No games this weekend, but that does not mean that we will rest. We're going to talk a little strategy with Judah Fortgang, SGPs, how to fit them into your bet portfolio, and when you do, how to construct them in the best way possible. It's going to be great. I've been meaning to do that conversation for a while, finally had the opportunity to do so. And of course, we're still going to play some bets today. So Arjun is going to come on and join us, and we're going to find some value before the rest of the peasants come in and start hammering overs. So with that, let's rock. All right, we have no Seth Galina today, which means the podcast is going to be 40 minutes shorter, and there's no pet peeves, no football pet peeves. So he better be storing them up for us when he comes on next week. Brad and Judah are going to kick it off with us. How you doing, fellas?
I'm doing great. Excited to take a little bit of a breath before we can dive back into some Super Bowl stuff. It's good to take a breath once every 20 weeks or so.
I think if I just came off a 50K winner, I'd be looking for action. But hey, to each their own. More time to build the next one though. I get it.
Brad has actually had a really busy week because as a Bears fan, this is this is Super Bowl week. I mean, everyone's doing mock draft sims. People here, I'm assuming members of the press are familiar with the PFF mock draft sim. We had over 4 times as many people do a mock draft sim last week than we had last year. And I think it's all your Bears fans. It is.
I would imagine so. And also keep a tabs. Trevor Sycamore posting all that great Senior Bowl content on Twitter. I think I've consumed more videos of guys that are probably going to go in the 6th round than anyone you could possibly imagine. But hey, it's out there. It's great content. And then you can go see those videos and go draft those guys in the mock draft sim.
Yes, you can. Go to pff.com for all that great content. Obviously, Judah's content on there as well. Brad's doing a phenomenal job with the free agency rankings that it's really second to none. Projected contracts, data and analysis. It is one of one. And if you're interested in betting on the draft, which I'm excited for the Super Bowl, but I'm really excited for draft props. I'm out here in New York, and just a quick anecdote. I was talking to some of the people that work at the sports books, and draft props and the draft in general, is the place to be. They admitted it. They were like, it's tough for us to win on draft props, and they don't lose on many things, right? I mean, these guys are printing money on a weekly basis, and the draft is not one of those areas. Now, part of it is obviously the kind of regular bettor doesn't come in and bet the draft, so it's a lot of people that are betting on information and sharp information, but it can be had. And so really excited for that. People in the printing press Discord already talking about draft props, which is exciting. By the way, go join that if you have not already. We've got merch. They should have been delivered. Should be delivered tomorrow to my home. So it'll be great. Get yourself some of that by joining the Discord. Okay, let's talk SGP strategy. And the way I want to kind of tee this off, Judah, is if you go on social media, it seems like people only place SGPs. And that can be a little harrowing because then you go in there and you're creating 15 different SGPs and that's all you have. And then you're sitting there, kind of hoping and wishing on a prayer. I assume that's not quite what you do, but you also do a very good job of constructing, as you call it, a portfolio of bets. And those include the 50K, same game parlays, right? But it's not the only thing that you're doing. So, talk us through how you construct what makes up your portfolio of bets on a particular game or a particular week.
Yeah. So I think there are almost 2 points here. Number one is I don't have a uniform rule, which is if I think I have a good sense of kind of there's gonna be a narrow range of outcomes on teams, I won't necessarily go out of my way to place much at all on an SGP, right? Like if I don't have a great tails angle, I'm not going to force it in there. That's the first thing. And like conversely, like in this past, like the championship games, I didn't really have a good sense of like who was going to win. Like I didn't have a strong lead on spreads. And there it was more a matter of like, okay, I'll play some same game parlays, but I'm not going to just like, okay, I don't have my regular unit on, a spread or a total or whatever. Let me just go like filter that and place a same game parlay. Like, I didn't do that. You still kind of constructed it as a small portion. So that's kind of the first point. The second is you kind of, I think of it as almost like a pyramid, which is like, where's my thesis coming from? Do I have a strong lean on like a particular angle that's going to turn into an SGP? And that's how I think the game's going to go, where it's like, I think, let's say, to use last week's example, didn't end up working out. But it's like, I think the Eagles are going to win, particularly because I'm so confident in this angle, right? There, I'll be fine just placing the same game parlay. But if it's actually built from a place of like, I think that, for instance, the Cowboys parlay that I hit, it didn't kind of come from like, oh, I think Dak Prescott's going to play well. It was like, I actually like the Cowboys here. So there I'm going to place bets first on, let's say, the spread. My personal preference is not to. I just generally prefer to place the alt spreads. But I can understand why someone would just place that one spread to kind of account for most of the variance. And then a kind of a level down, I would say I place kind of like a mini same game parlay, which is very broad and just takes into account kind of my central thesis. So to use the example of the Cowboys one, I was confident that the Cowboys were going to win and they're going to win through the pass. So I'm going to keep it to two angles. I'm going to dedicate most, but not all of my bankroll to that. And then I can start to really build out this kind of SGP process, which we'll talk about later, which is just kind of a small fraction, but enough to really make a difference. Because I'm not really, it's one thing when you see people posting online, and I happen to have a bigger bet size, that's fine. When you like win $5, it's amazing. But the common theme is, I wish I put more. And it's not to say like you should not do it responsibly. It should be a portion of your bankroll. But the fact that it is long odds shouldn't mean that you should like, okay, I'll spend much less because the odds are longer. I think that's kind of the key point. And it's like when I won that one time, I'm really glad that I put just a little bit more money, because the same game parlays, I'm like basically trying to break even until that one time when I really hit it. And like, obviously you have to do it responsibly, but just because the odds are long doesn't mean you shouldn't kind of put a decent amount on it.
Well, I had a slightly,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No.
So I had a slightly different question for you, but tied to your past SGP. You talked about how you found an angle of when A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith goes over, the other one also is likely to go over. Have you found, or is that, I'm sure you're looking at the odds themselves and how they increase when you add more plays. So I would think intuitively that if you add those two things in there, they actually would boost it even more than just, hey, let's say, A.J. Brown over 80 yards is what, plus 150. I'm just making stuff up. Devontae Smith over 60 is whatever. If you add those two in there, it's going to boost it by more than just the mathematical, increase, because those things probably shouldn't happen in tandem, but you actually found that it did. And is there even a larger edge there? Because you're basically, you're gaming against what they maybe are increasing the odds with those two correlated plays. I hope that makes sense.
No, that's a great point. And this is something kind of when we like get into the actual construction of the SGP, which maybe we can do now, which is like layering.
Actually, I have one question before you get into that, just so people have a sense of your exposure there. So I think you're talking about what you said, don't, just because it's long odds, don't just, throw $5 on it, right? If your unit size is, let's say 25, 50, or 100. So I think just to kind of repeat back what you were saying, it's like, if you're going to bet a unit, on, these other bets, bet a unit on an SGP, is that the way that you'd phrase it? And like, from a percentage standpoint, what would you say the average is for you in terms of your exposure to an SGP versus kind of the other bets in your portfolio?
Yeah. So my exposure is probably like 10%. I happen to, again, in games where I either have like a lot of conviction or I think the like tails angle is the kind of driver of like my view of the game. Where it's like, I'm really convinced that this angle is going to hit. That's when I'll kind of, as I did for the Cowboys one, put a little bit more on it. But it's 10%. I'm also like allocating portions of stuff to do live and understand like I can maybe hedge off some of my props live, but I'm not just like saying, okay, I'm going to put down 1%, 20%. It's more so like a range that probably averages out to like still a small fraction, but enough to actually be a meaningful difference when you do kind of hit.
Cool. Okay, so let's get into, now we understand how kind of our bankroll is dispersed, and now we're getting into the fun stuff, which is like, okay, what are the ingredients to me making 50, 100, 200, whatever K, and how do we construct those? Because I'll just say this, like, if you open up your sportsbook app, they're going to promote a bunch of different same game parlays to you. They're probably all going to look very similar. And, it's kind of the run of the mill stuff, right? It's like, okay, these two players score a touchdown, they're quarterbacks, maybe both quarterbacks are going to throw for 300 yards. It's stuff that, it's not helping you kind of create an edge for yourself. So as you think about it, your strategy for giving yourself an edge in constructing a parlay in the same game, and the reason, just for anyone out there that's kind of new to this, the reason that's so compelling is that things within a game are correlated to one another. And so whereas if you're betting on the first touchdown score of 6 different games, just because you hit the first one has no bearing. You may think you're lucky or you have the hot hand, but I can promise you, like, there is no correlation to you, no causation to help you then get that second one. But in the same game, those things are all interconnected, right? And so, that kind of mentality allows for you to kind of really create this cool strategy. So why don't you walk us through what that strategy looks like?
Yeah. So I start with, as I like to say, some central thesis. We talk about this all the time on the podcast, right? And I have its varying reasons what like gets me to that initial thesis. It's usually something kind of data driven that I'm finding as I'm digging through things. And instead of just stopping there and betting it, I'm basically saying, okay, let's play it out to its conclusion. And I ask myself basically 2 questions, which is one, what happens in this game script that allows for my thesis to play out? Meaning, like, certain teams, the Eagles, let's say, they need some driver to make them throw a lot, because they're not Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, and they're just going to throw 45 times no matter what, because that's how they operate their offense, right? They need some sort of driver. They need probably their opponents to either score a bunch to keep them aggressive, or they need their running game to fall completely flat. I'm kind of asking, like, what's the game script? So that's one angle to it. And the second is, what else needs to, the second angle is like the second order effects, basically saying if player X, throws for 300 yards, play out the rest of the story. What else is going to happen, right? To use the Cowboys example, it's how does Dak Prescott get those yards? Are they coming from CeeDee Lamb? Are they coming from Dalton Schultz? Or better yet, the reason I added T.Y. Hilton to that leg is I said, if Dak Prescott's going to hit 300 yards, he's going to have to hit a deep pass at some point. T.Y. Hilton's been the deep guy. He's likely to get 40, 50 yards. That's not being priced in because he's at 20 right now. And you're kind of asking, okay, play out this scenario. If they're in this passing script, what else needs to happen? And then this, I think, gets to Brad's point, which is within those 2 questions, and there's kind of a lot to handle, I guess, without like seeing something visually. I'm looking at team tendencies, and that's, I think, the key, and that's where I think there's the most value. So to kind of walk you through the process of even building a parlay last week, if you took the over on, Hurts passing yards, Brown receiving yards, Smith receiving yards, and then you look at Dallas Goedert, I'm thinking, okay, the whole point of this is that I think that the Eagles are going to throw to the outside receivers and not the tight ends, right? And if anything, those 2 guys hit together and no one else hits. I'm going to say that Dallas Goedert under is actually the most correlated play. But the sportsbook had it the opposite way. The odds barely moved if you took Dallas Goedert over 45.5, but they almost tripled when he took the under. Because there's a natural correlation there, basically saying if you're taking the Hurts over by a lot, then all of the other receiver overs should be correlated as well. But I don't think that's the case. Another classic example, and one I've been using all year, is that rushing props and like the more bullish you get on your team spread, right? If the game is -2.5 and I put it as -6.5, that's gonna be really correlated with rushing props. But for certain teams and certain quarterbacks, accounting for their team tendencies, I actually think that's more correlated for the quarterback, because the reason they built up that 6.5 point lead in the first place had nothing to do with their running game, but had everything to do with their passing game. And they're only gonna stop passing and start rushing once that game is already in hand. And to get to that point, again, going back to that kind of first prong of the game environment, that happens through the passing game and not the running game.
So, one of the things that I think is really interesting is we are really lucky because we spend a ton of time with data and analysis, right? And I'm thinking about the person out there, the member of the printing press, or first time listener, whatever it is, first time bettor, and how they might actually do some of this themselves, right? And like, maybe take us through how you start to find those theses. Are there certain things that you're looking at, right? And what do I mean by that? Like, how do I start some of my analysis? I'll give an example. I often start by looking at the two teams, right? Actually, I go to pff.com, and I'm not just like pimping the product. This is what I use. And I look at the matchups, right? I look at the offense. I look at the one offense versus one defense, and I look at the other. And then I kind of start asking myself, okay, what am I noticing? What questions do I now have? Do I notice Dallas Goedert? Wow, he's third in PFF grade. Interesting. Linebackers on the other side, on the Giants, they're not great. Maybe I'll go dig a little bit deeper, right? But like, how do you, Judah, what are kind of some of the starting points? And what are the things that you find yourself coming back to from an analysis standpoint that are often helping construct the angle that you have? Because there's an ocean of data out there, right? You could, you could start somewhere and never end up where you get to.
Yeah. So I think kind of similar to you. I number one look at like the PFF and the matchups, and that's certainly something I come back to. But I have like a kind of like in my R script, I have a file that I keep going back to, which basically outlines all the team tendencies. And by that, it can range from like how often they play man or zone to just kind of like some basic stats. What's their EPA? What's their success rate? How often do teams pass against them? How often do teams run against them? What do they do against the blitz? What about pressure? What about not quick? I have a whole bunch of these kind of variables that I'm looking at, and I'm looking at the matchups and I'm saying, okay, what sticks out? And from there, I'm going to build out and say like, okay, Joe Burrow's or Patrick Mahomes is great against the blitz. This team blitzes a lot. Like, let's bet on Patrick Mahomes. Not a great example because it's always good to bet on Patrick Mahomes, but there are plenty of kind of like anomalies that you'll find, and this is stuff we've been pitching all year that are kind of matchup based. The other thing is I'm like looking to kind of bet the same recurring. I think there's a huge market inefficiency with like quarterbacks, passing yards, and spreads because they're just automatically going to price in. And I'm looking for like, okay, what about the pace of this game, right? Is Joe Burrow going to have enough passing attempts? Is the game going to be quick paced enough? And I'm just like looking at kind of the same metrics and just like tailoring it for the matchup and saying, does it fit this week? Who's hurt? That's another thing I keep coming back to is injuries. And it's very difficult to quantify injuries. And I think especially if you're a matchup based, betting week to week, it's very difficult to price in. And I'm looking for kind of those inefficiencies.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And looking at those different subsets of performance, I think that's really helpful for people, right? And those are some of the things that we try and bring to people on PFF.com and like allow them to start digging into. But it's hard, like, to kind of navigate your way through there. And I think everyone wants to find those things, but time is, like, no one has the time to do that. So that's one of the reasons we suggest people go, obviously, read your content, you put in that work and then bring it to the people. But it's cool for those to kind of start, if you're interested in like, okay, how could I use some programming? And by the way, like, if you've never programmed before, just open up ChatGPT and ask it to write you a script.
I want to say two things here. Number one, on the programming point, I like started with absolutely nothing, right? Like, I was betting, I didn't know anything. The way I like got into programming in the first place was just like following tutorials so that I could do this easier. And like, I promise you, if I could do it, anyone can do it. The second thing, just like as we're kind of making a general point about like process, I happen to be very good at tails angles. Like, that's the thing that I happen to see. I think like everyone kind of should be looking for that niche, the thing that they themselves are good at, where they have conviction and they can see kind of their own angles. That could be a spread, it could be a total, it could be player props, it could be anything. I don't think it's a one size fits all type thing. I think you kind of have to like know how to look at the data and crunch it kind of the way that your brain makes sense, or it makes sense to your brain. And I think that's kind of the key point. It happens to be the tail stuff for me. I know that. That's why I don't bet much, spreads at all, to be honest. But that's the point I would stress about, like, in your process, just knowing what you're actually good at and knowing kind of where you can sift through the data and how you can like actualize that into good bets.
I did have a follow-up with you
That's
real quick on the injury point you made. And I'm taking this from something you always hear on fantasy Twitter when people talk about, oh, this team lost this receiver, so there's this many vacated targets or this much vacated target share. And there's kind of an adage I've seen where it's like, that's not really a thing. Like the player, it's not a one-to-one where if this guy leaves, all of a sudden everyone else is just going to get more usage. Tying that back to the injury point, like when a guy goes down, do you think there's value in the books assuming, okay, this player usually gets 4 targets a game. Let's say it's their number 2 receiver. The top receiver goes down. And they're, oh, now he's going to get 7 targets this week. No, he's probably still going to get his usual workload. They're just going to find other ways to replace, that guy's production, or maybe he'll get a little bit uptick. But do you think there's also kind of edges in being contrarian with how they respond and react to certain injuries, at skill-making positions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's almost a great example. And it's like this gets back to like where team tendencies really make a difference, which is like knowing how roles are going to change. If like people like to say vacant, like if the X receiver is down and they're going to bring it like a new person into the X receiver role, like for some teams that means something that it's like, okay, we're just going to plug and play. And for others, it's like, no, we're going to start attacking the Z, the Y, etc. Where it's like really that's a matter of, and there's a ton of value because like I don't think books have a great way of kind of differentiating between the two teams because they have to kind of have a general rule. It's very complex to kind of account for these things. But if you're just doing it on a one-off basis and you're looking at the injuries, you got to like pay attention to the team tendencies. Does this team like look to historical data, look to the coordinators? Are they just going to plug and play or are they going to change their offense?
That makes sense. Judah, thank you so much for hanging out with us. We appreciate you. And you can go find him on Twitter at @ThrowTheDamnBall, of course, and find all his great content on PFF.com, PFF app as well. He's promised that he's getting a haircut before our next episode, so we'll hold him to that. Thank you, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Before we get to Arjun, I want to remind everyone that if you're looking, you've been finally, pushed into betting by us on this podcast. DraftKings is a great place for you to get started. Go to DraftKings, use promo code PFF, bet just $5, get $200 in free bets. Get yourself set up for the big day. There's still time. And take advantage of those free bets and maybe place them on some draft props afterwards as well. All customers that show up to DraftKings and use promo code PFF have that opportunity. But if you're a current customer, shouldn't shy away either because there are plenty of Super Bowl boosts for current customers to get excited about. So we're about to talk about some great bets that we like for the upcoming Super Bowl, many of which are not going to be spread or total related. Remember, props are the way to go. And DraftKings has plenty of those. So go to DraftKings Sportsbook and download the app. Use promo code PFF. Minimum age restrictions do apply. This is void in Ohio, and the show notes will give you more details. Also, go check out our friends at Western and Southern. Western and Southern Financial helps you create a game plan to reach your financial goals. So whether that's buying a house, starting a family, just saving up for retirement, whatever it might be, they can customize a game plan for you by going to westernsouthern.com/PFF, and they will help put together a winning plan specifically for you. And last but not least, if you're looking for another way to participate in betting, maybe you can't bet legally in the state that you're at, go to Underdog Fantasy. They have tons of awesome contests, both for the Super Bowl and for other sports that you can play. And if you use promo code PFF, they will double your first deposit up to $100. UnderdogFantasy.com and the Underdog Fantasy app is to bet on the game and which song Rihanna is going to lead off with. I am going to guess that you've done more research on the game than you have the Rihanna first song, but I'm here to be surprised.
Look, I mean, I'm a man of surprises. You guys probably don't even know that like my favorite genre of music is rock, and that I literally could not name you a Rihanna song like just off the top of my head. So of course, like I don't have much of any research done on that. And yeah, I've definitely been trying to find angles to bet on this game from like a props and just a overall game line perspective.
I have to ask.
We haven't seen you ripping the guitar on Twitter, dude. We've seen it. We've seen it, man. Go ahead, George.
I haven't seen these. I was going to ask, where's Where's the evidence?
Arjun shreds.
Can you? All right. Yeah. This is we needed incentive for people to join the Printing Press Discord. This is it. We've been told that Arjun is going to perform live in the Printing Press Discord. So if Rihanna is not your thing, We have we have Arjun on the guitar. Give me your favorite performance then. Favorite performer, band, solo, whatever it is.
Have to go with Metallica. Just nice. Overall favorite band, has my favorite songs. Got to see them live in LA when they toured the US, thankfully. So I've gotten to see them live. The performance wasn't as good as the originals, but it's about the vibes there. And it's definitely, I went there when I was like 15, 16, and like I think I was the only one of my age group there. So definitely an interesting vibe to go to one of their concerts.
I can imagine you were the youngest guy there by about 40 years.
All right, let's talk this game then. So Arjun, why don't you kick us off? Like what's one of the more interesting things that as you started breaking this down, and we talked about it on Sunday, kind of initial reactions, right? But as you started to kind of peel back the layers of the onion, what sticks out to you?
Yeah, so not a lot has changed in terms of like my kind of read on this game. I think the Eagles' run game will dominate. I know for the most part, the Chiefs' run defense has been pretty good. They kind of shut down the Bengals last week, but I still think they're susceptible in the interior. I know Chris Jones is a great pass rusher. He has his moments in the run game, but I do worry about like their other interior guys with Mike Dana, and especially their edge guys. Like playoff Frank Clark is a tremendous pass rusher, but if you're able to attack them at the edges, I think that's where you can have a lot of success. So I've been looking at some of the rushing yard props for the Eagles, the longest rush prop for the Eagles, which I think there's some evidence where the Eagles will dominate there that I'm happy to talk about as we get into some of our favorite bets.
Brad, what about you? Anything that's stuck out to you?
Yeah, so moving on from what we talked about Sunday, I think the one that's really jumped out to me is the longest reception prop. I talked about it on our Wednesday show last week, in particular with Devontae Smith, and it was actually 24.5 last week, and it's now 23.5. And I get that we identified that the Niners were susceptible to outside the numbers, downfield passing. But the Chiefs, we saw T. Higgins obviously mossed them in the end zone. Jamar Chase in double coverage. Neither defensive back turns around, just catches the ball in the middle of the field right by the goal line. I think you can also, Steve Spagnuolo runs a lot of man coverage. He's going to blitz, I'm sure, throughout the game at certain points, maybe try to capitalize on some of the banged-up Eagles offensive linemen. And I think going back to that with a longest reception prop for Devontae Smith is interesting. And then a second one, an alternate spread, which I love that they have these. Alternate spread for Isaiah Pacheco, rushing and receiving prop. Over 100 is plus 360 right now on DraftKings. It's, of course, going with the narrative of you think the Chiefs are going to win this game. He had 6 catches for, I want to say, 46 yards against the Bengals. He's become the dude, both as a pass catcher and obviously their main rushing threat. So it's a game script play. It is, of course, kind of counter to the spread and the narrative here of the Eagles being the favorite. But if you like them, we know the Eagles are 6th worst against the rush in terms of EPA per run. And then you add in that I think maybe we're going to see, 4, 5, 6 targets and maybe catches again from Isaiah Pacheco.
Yeah, he played, I think it's 25 receiving snaps or passing snaps. It was the by far his highest. He had 6 targets, which was double the most that he's had all year. And it was successful. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, the dude was untackleable. I thought it was very clear that he provided more juice than Jerick McKinnon. And here's the other thing. These receivers, I mean, we don't know yet. But, they're banged up and they're not that great to begin with. Please don't throw stones at me, Chiefs fans. They are going to be looking for someone to add some juice there. And it's clear that this guy can, so I think that's a really, really good call out. And, it will be something I would guess that will move pretty significantly over the next week or so. But Arjun, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I wanted to add something on to Brad's point, talking about the longest reception prop. So I think this is something I brought up last week at one point. The 49ers defense is built to kind of stop the Eagles offense. They love to run a lot of cover 3. That is the one coverage that Jalen Hurts struggles the most against. So, for reference, Jalen Hurts has like a positive EPA per play versus almost every cover or against every major coverage. But against cover 3, he averages a negative 1. Before last week, he averaged a negative 0.162 EPA per play versus cover 3. The Chiefs run the lowest percentage of cover 3 by a pretty significant margin. They run cover 3 only about 13.4% of the time. The next lowest is 19.7%. So you're not going to see a lot of single high from Spags, or he's not going to, or history has kind of shown this season that he's not going to be playing a lot of cover 3, which is the one coverage that Hurts struggles against. And against cover 2, which is I think Spags' main coverage of choice, Hurts is averaging a 0.172 EPA per play. So I think there's a lot of good signs pointing towards the Eagles' passing attack being efficient in this game, unless Spags comes out and completely changes his game plan to kind of attack Hurts' weakness.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the Eagles, on the other side, that's their most played coverage, is cover 3, interestingly. I think I looked this up. Mahomes actually just 7th or 8th in PFF grade against cover 3. Now, I don't use that as a negative. I don't expect Mahomes to go out and struggle against their coverage. I guess, to me, it still really does boil down to what kind of a plan does Andy Reid have for Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat? And I got to think that that's the handicap, and that's why the Eagles are favored in this game. But I guess as I've thought about this more, it's kind of a tired narrative to be hey, we've seen this game before, and the Chiefs got killed in that game. They have faced that situation before. They clearly didn't have a good game plan for it. Their offensive line isn't anywhere near as dilapidated across the board. It's they don't have, it's not like Andrew Wiley and Orlando Brown are injury replacements. They just stink. They have a really good interior, right, that is going to shore that up, as you'd expect. And you have a time in the Super Bowl where you failed against good edge rushers. So I wouldn't expect Andy Reid to come into this game and just go, oh yeah, we're going to run back that same game plan, right? They're going to be thoughtful about this because they saw it take a Super Bowl away from them. And so I wonder if that overreaction to this is something that you should actually flip the other way and go, no, we have seen this before. They didn't do a good job about it against it, but as you'd expect a great, offensive mind and offense to do, they're going to kind of scheme around it. So that was one of the ways that I was sort of thinking about, a play on this game that you could kind of then flow down into, different props and maybe construct an SGP if you wanted to around. And that's a very contrarian one. And, my question, I guess, for you guys is, if I have that, because I was kind of trying to think this through, what would be the natural, say they do handle Hassan Reddick well, what do you think that then correlates with in terms of who benefits on the Chiefs side?
I actually think we saw this against the Bengals, and I think it works for the Chiefs in multiple ways. My answer is I think they're going to play in more 12 personnel, to have Noah Gray or whoever else chip potentially on Hassan Reddick or Josh Sweat, but also to try to get the Eagles out of dime personnel. Now with Devontae Maddox back, they've been playing, and when they had Devontae Maddox and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson healthy, which wasn't a ton because they both kind of got hurt throughout the year, but of a ton of DBs on the field. And I think you try to get them to at least play in nickel and not have so many DBs all over the place with Reed Blankenship and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Devontae Maddox. And then that way you can beat them over the middle because maybe you get Kaiser White or TJ Edwards matched up against Travis Kelce or whoever else they have in the slot. So that would be my guess, is you see heavier personnel packages from Andy Reid. They elevated Jody Fortson from the practice squad last week against Cincinnati. So they've kind of shown that they want to have different ways to get the defense to then counter. And Gannon likes to sit back in self-coverage and get a ton of DBs out there. And maybe that's a way to force them to say, hey, look, if you're not going to respond to this and you're going to be in dime against 12 personnel, then my guy Isaiah Pacheco is going to run it down your throat. So I think that's probably an interesting way. And maybe, you play, I don't know, Noah Gray props, or maybe that's a little bit of a stretch. But I do think that is kind of a counter that we could see from Andy Reid.
That's interesting. One of the ways, so I like that one quite a bit. I was actually thinking about one of the ways that I would expect, and this is probably the wrong way to think about it because you never want to coach your bets or try and get inside Andy Reid's mind. But their strength, obviously Mahomes is their strength, but they also have a real strength in the interior. And the Eagles have a weakness relatively defending the run. And so I wonder if they really do try and press that advantage. Andrew Wiley's horrible as a pass protector. He's not as terrible as a run blocker. And if they really try to run at these guys, do something that would completely throw people off guard, because everyone's expecting Mahomes to, throw a lot, and I'd expect him to eventually get there. But maybe they come out and establish the run. I do think that could be, a way towards that, maybe that first half under that we've talked about, to some Pacheco, maybe carry props. That'd be an interesting angle there. But Arjun, what else are you thinking from a kind of a betting angle perspective?
Yeah, so like I talked about, really looking at some of the Eagles rushing props, specifically the backup guys, Kenneth Gainwell. One prop I've really liked, Kenneth Gainwell, longest rush over 8.5 yards. So the Eagles have the highest rate of perfectly blocked runs in the entire NFL by a pretty wide margin. It's about 5% between them and I believe it's the Ravens. And the Chiefs are one of the worst defenses at allowing perfectly blocked runs, i.e. basically like when they're on defense, they allow offenses to do their job, especially along the offensive line. So when you consider Kenneth Gainwell taking carries away from Miles Sanders, it's going to be in situations where I think Gainwell's pretty healthy, and he's also going to have a chance to break one off, especially with how good the Eagles are at blocking run plays. And even outside of the perfectly blocked run angle, like the Eagles are just the best rushing offense in the NFL, and I think they've been splitting carries with Miles Sanders and Kenneth Gainwell for weeks now.
I like that one a lot. Just jump in real quick. I like that a lot because I mentioned my guy Kenneth Gainwell on Sunday, and I may be looking at his combined rush receiving props. It's up by, I think, 12 yards above last week, so I'm probably going to stay away there. I think it's a bit of a market correction, but betting on one to pop off, him to get one explosive rush, and Jeff Stoutland's elite. I'm glad that they show up first in that metric because I think anyone in the NFL would tell you they're the best run game in the NFL by a decent margin. So I like that one a lot because I'm a little bit wary of his totals now because they've been boosted pretty significantly.
Yeah, that makes sense. By the way, our guy, Dallas Goedert, remember he opened a couple weeks ago, 41.5. Opened last week, I want to say it's like 49.5. No one can quite get it right. They're splitting the difference here. He's at 46.5. I actually, even though he went under last week, and that was, a part of our kind of thesis, and it played out, I was actually surprised, that the Niners did a very good job of covering him. They didn't allow any yak. That was a huge piece of this. But they still got him pretty involved. They were not scared, right? It seems like he is a really central part of their game plan, passing the football. And here's the other thing that I'm very interested to see in this game is Jalen Hurts was shaky. Yeah, he was definitely shaky against San Francisco. And he missed that long A.J. Brown deep ball that I'm still not over. But I definitely see them leaning into the run, leaning into those short throws, leaning into Dallas Goedert. Maybe a lot more short stuff for A.J. Brown, some of that yards after the catch, and taking their shots very carefully, right? It seems like if they kind of look at things, they go, yeah, we can kind of outmuscle the Chiefs, and so let's kind of lean into that. Okay, so just to set the table, we'll be back on Sunday as we normally do. That'll be a little bit of a different show. We obviously are not going to recap are they doing the Pro Bowl Skills Challenge? I don't even know what they're doing at this point.
I think so.
Yeah, we're not gonna recap that. Don't worry. And then of course on over the course of next week and on Wednesday we'll come through with our locks of the week. Maybe we push that up a little bit. Maybe we give a couple on Sunday. Get the ball rolling before too many people come in. Obviously, the National Anthem Syndicate, a lot of research to be done there. I've been hard at work. People think that I'm actually doing things for PFF. No, I'm really just scouring for Chris Stapleton National Anthem content. And Arjun is going to, of course, diversify his musical tastes and learn a lot about Rihanna.
Yeah, exactly. I'll be a changed man by next week.
Where's Rihanna on your list, Brad?
Very much so near the top. Rihanna's elite. Okay. Let me tell you real quick. When you were in college, when the time I was in college, Rihanna was running the show. I mean, she hasn't made new music since, but 2012 to 2016 was the Rihanna era, if you will.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. All right. Remember to join the Printing Press Discord as well. Link is in the description, we've got printing press hats. I've been getting DMs left and right from people trying to get one. You can't get one unless you're a member of the Discord. So go join and hang out and get some of the good vibes. Arjun, Brad, love you both. Printing press. Peace.